The morning sun cast long shadows across Windsor Castle as Prince William stood at his office window, watching the groundskeepers tend to the royal gardens. His usually steady hands trembled slightly as he held the official document that would change everything. After months of private discussions, sleepless nights, and careful consideration, he and Catherine had made an impossible decision that would shock the world. Catherine entered the room quietly, her footsteps barely audible, on the ancient oak floors. She carried 2 cups of tea, a simple gesture that had become their ritual during these difficult weeks. Her face, though still beautiful, showed the weight of their choice. Dark circles under her eyes revealed the toll that endless debates and soul-searching had taken on the future Queen of England. "The children are asking questions again," she said softly, setting down his cup. "Charlotte wants to know why we've been having so many serious conversations behind closed doors. George keeps asking if everything is all right with Papa and Mama." William turned from the window, his blue eyes reflecting years of royal duty and the burden of expectations that had shaped his entire life. "Perhaps it's time we told them. They deserve to understand what's coming, even if we can't explain all the reasons right now." The decision had been building for years, though neither of them had wanted to admit it. The constant scrutiny, the impossible balance between public service and private family life, the weight of knowing that every decision they made would be analyzed, criticized, and judged by millions of people around the world. But it wasn't just about them anymore. It was about their children's future and the kind of life they wanted to give George, Charlotte, and Louis. Catherine sat down in the chair across from his desk, the same chair where countless monarchs had made decisions that shaped British history. "I keep thinking about your mother," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "How she struggled with this same choice. The difference is we actually have the power to choose a different path." Princess Diana's tragic story had always haunted William. The paparazzi chases, the invasion of privacy, the way the media had consumed every aspect of her life until there was nothing left that belonged solely to her. He had sworn that his wife and children would never endure the same fate, but lately that promise seemed harder and harder to keep. The breaking point had come 3 months earlier during what should have been a private family vacation in Scotland. Photographers with long-range lenses had captured intimate moments of their children playing on the beach. The images, published across tabloids worldwide, showed Louis building sandcastles while Charlotte chased seagulls. To the public, they were charming pictures of royal children at play. To William and Catherine, they were a violation of everything they held sacred. "I won't let them grow up the way I did," William had told Catherine that night as they walked along the moonlit shore. Always performing, always being watched, never knowing which friends genuinely care about them and which ones see them as a path to fame or money. Catherine had nodded, understanding the pain behind his words. She had given up her own dreams of a quiet life when she married into the royal family, but she had made that choice as an adult. Their children had no such luxury of choice, at least not under the current system. The idea had started as a whisper, a what-if conversation during one of their rare moments alone. What if they could step back from royal duties while still maintaining their commitment to the causes they cared about? What if they could give their children a chance to discover who they were beyond their titles and birthright? Other members of royal families around the world had made similar choices. Some had renounced their titles entirely, while others had found ways to serve their countries while living more private lives. But for the future King and Queen of England, the stakes were infinitely higher. William's private secretary had initially been horrified when they first broached the subject. "Your Royal Highness," he had said, his face pale with shock, "the constitutional implications alone would require months of discussion with Parliament, not to mention the Prime Minister's office and the Commonwealth nations." But William and Catherine had done their research. They had spent countless hours with constitutional lawyers, historians, and advisors, exploring every possible avenue. The more they learned, the more convinced they became that change was not only possible, but perhaps necessary for the monarchy's long-term survival. "The institution needs to evolve," Catherine had argued during one particularly heated discussion with senior palace officials. "If we continue to operate exactly as we did 50 years ago, we risk becoming irrelevant to the people we're supposed to serve." The Queen, now in her late 90s, had been surprisingly receptive to their concerns when they finally gathered the courage to speak with her. During a private audience at Balmoral, she had listened quietly as William explained their reasoning, occasionally asking pointed questions but never expressing disapproval. "I have watched this family struggle with the balance between duty and happiness for my entire life," she had said finally, her voice still strong despite her advanced age. Perhaps it is time for a new approach. Her words had given them hope, but they knew that royal approval was only the first step in what would be an incredibly complex process. The British public, who had watched William grow from a shy boy following his mother's coffin to a confident father and future king, would need to understand their decision. As William and Catherine sat in their office that morning reviewing the carefully worded statement that would announce their intention to step back from their current roles, they both felt the weight of history pressing down on them. They were not just making a personal choice. They were potentially changing the course of the British monarchy forever. "Are we being selfish?" Catherine asked, voicing the question that had haunted both of them for months. William reached across the desk and took her hand. "We're being parents," he said simply. "And maybe that's exactly what the monarchy needs right now. Leaders who understand that serving the people doesn't have to mean sacrificing everything that makes us human." Outside, the first tourists of the day were gathering at the castle gates, hoping to catch a glimpse of the royal family. Soon, those same gates would witness something unprecedented in modern British history, a farewell that would redefine what it meant to serve the crown in the 21st century. The news broke on a Tuesday morning that would forever change British history. Social media exploded within minutes of the official palace statement being released, with hashtags trending worldwide before most people had even finished their morning coffee. The carefully worded announcement, posted simultaneously on all royal social media accounts and the official palace website, sent shockwaves through not just Britain, but the entire Commonwealth. After months of careful consideration and extensive consultation, the statement read, "Their Royal Highnesses, the Duke and Duchess of Cambridge, have decided to transition to a new model of royal service that will allow them to continue their charitable work while providing their children with greater privacy and the opportunity to choose their own paths in life." Television news anchors struggled to find precedent for what was happening. The last time a senior royal had voluntarily stepped back from duties was Edward VIII's abdication in 1936, but that had been driven by scandal and constitutional crisis. This was something entirely different, a thoughtful, planned evolution that had the Queen's blessing and parliamentary support. Catherine's phone buzzed constantly with messages from friends, family members, and colleagues from her pre-royal life. Many expressed concern, wondering if she was unhappy or if there were problems in her marriage that the public didn't know about. She found herself having to explain repeatedly that this wasn't about running away from responsibility, but rather about redefining what royal responsibility meant in the modern world. Her mother, Carol Middleton, arrived at Kensington Palace within hours of the announcement. She found her daughter in the nursery, packing toys and books while trying to explain to 3-year-old Louis why there were so many reporters outside their gates. "Mama, why are all those people here?" Louis asked, pressing his face against the window to peer at the crowd of journalists and photographers that had gathered. Catherine knelt down to his level, smoothing his unruly hair with gentle fingers. "They're here because Papa and Mama have something important to tell everyone," she explained. "We're going to live somewhere new, somewhere quieter, where you and George and Charlotte can play outside without worrying about cameras." Louis nodded, solemnly, as if this made perfect sense to his 3-year-old logic. Children, Catherine reflected, were remarkably adaptable when adults were honest with them. George and Charlotte had taken the news differently. At 10 years old, George was beginning to understand the weight of his future role as king. The announcement had confused him because he had been told his whole life that being royal meant serving the people, and stepping back seemed like the opposite of service. "Are we not going to be royal anymore?" he had asked his father the night before the announcement. William had sat on the edge of his son's bed, choosing his words carefully. "We'll always be your family, George, but being royal doesn't have to mean doing everything exactly the way it's always been done." Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is choose a different path when you know it's right. Charlotte, 8 years old and fiercely protective of her family's privacy, had actually been the most supportive of the decision. She had grown tired of having her school friends ask her what it was like to be a princess, tired of being treated differently because of her last name rather than who she was as a person. The public reaction was mixed and intense. Social media divided into fierce camps, those who supported the family's right to choose their own path, and those who saw the decision as an abandonment of duty. Newspaper headlines ranged from "A Modern Royal Revolution" to "The Abdication," "Crisis 2.0," but perhaps most surprising was the support that came from unexpected quarters. A group of military veterans, many of whom William had worked with through his mental health initiatives, published an open letter defending the decision. Prince William has served his country with distinction in the military and through his royal duties, they wrote. If he believes that stepping back will allow him to serve more effectively while protecting his family, then we support him completely. Similar letters came from mental health organizations, children's charities, and environmental groups, all causes that William and Catherine had championed throughout their royal careers. The message was clear. They weren't abandoning their commitments to these causes, they were simply finding new ways to support them. The Queen herself made an unprecedented public statement 3 days after the announcement. Speaking from Buckingham Palace, she addressed the nation directly, her voice steady and clear despite her advanced age. The institution of monarchy has survived and thrived for over 1,000 years because it has always been willing to adapt to changing times, she said, looking directly into the camera. My grandson and his wife have shown tremendous courage in choosing a path that they believe will allow them to serve both their family and their country more effectively. They have my full support and my blessing. Her words carried immense weight, effectively silencing many of the critics who had been calling the decision selfish or irresponsible. If the Queen herself supported this unprecedented move, then perhaps it truly was the right choice for the royal family's future. Behind the scenes, the logistical challenges were immense. Constitutional lawyers worked around the clock to establish the legal framework for William and Catherine's new roles. They would retain their titles but step back from the daily ceremonial duties that had defined royal life for centuries. Instead, they would focus on long-term projects and charitable initiatives that aligned with their personal passions and expertise. The most emotional moment came during their final official engagement as senior working royals. They chose to make it a visit to a children's hospital in London, the same hospital where Catherine had launched one of her first major charitable initiatives as a new royal bride 12 years earlier. As they walked through the wards, speaking with young patients and their families, staff members who had worked with them for years struggled to hide their emotions. Dr. Sarah Mitchell, who had collaborated with Catherine on numerous projects, found herself crying as she watched. The Duchess read stories to a group of children receiving cancer treatment. She's not just leaving a role, Dr. Mitchell later told reporters. She's leaving relationships that have been built over years of genuine caring and commitment. But I know she'll find new ways to help these children, even if it's not as a working royal. The final photograph from that hospital visit would become iconic. William and Catherine, hand in hand, walking down a corridor lined with hospital staff, their faces showing both sadness at what they were leaving behind and hope for what lay ahead. That evening, as they tucked their children into bed in what would be their last night in their official royal residence, the weight of their decision finally hit home. Tomorrow they would wake up as private citizens for the first time in over a decade. The world would be watching to see what they would do with this unprecedented freedom, and whether they could truly find a new way to serve their country while protecting the family they loved. The moving trucks arrived at dawn, their quiet efficiency a stark contrast to the media circus that had surrounded Kensington Palace for the past week. William and Catherine had chosen to relocate to a modest estate in the Cotswolds, far from the London spotlight that had defined their lives for over a decade. The house, while beautiful, was a fraction of the size of their royal residence, with no staff quarters, no formal reception rooms, and no security command center. Catherine walked through the empty rooms of their former home one last time, her footsteps echoing in spaces that had once been filled with the laughter of their children, the bustle of official functions, and the quiet conversations that had shaped their family's future. Each room held memories: George taking his first steps in the nursery, Charlotte's 5th birthday party in the drawing room, countless bedtime stories read in the family quarters while the sounds of London hummed outside their windows. "Mama, is this our real home now?" Louis asked as he explored the new house, his small voice filled with wonder at the idea of having a garden where he could run freely without worrying about photographers hiding in the bushes. "Yes, darling," Catherine replied, watching as he discovered a treehouse that the previous owners had left behind. "This is where we get to be just a family." The transition wasn't without its challenges. For the first time in their adult lives, William and Catherine had to handle ordinary tasks that had been managed by palace staff for years. Catherine found herself grocery shopping for the first time since her university days, marveling at how much prices had changed and how overwhelming the simple act of choosing breakfast cereal could be when you hadn't done it for over a decade. William struggled with different adjustments. He had spent so many years with his schedule managed down to the minute by private secretaries that the sudden freedom to choose how to spend his time felt both liberating and terrifying. Without the constant stream of official engagements, he found himself wondering if he was being productive enough, if he was still contributing meaningfully to society. The children adapted more quickly than their parents had expected. George, who had initially been worried about disappointing his future subjects, discovered a passion for wildlife photography during long walks around their new property. Charlotte threw herself into horseback riding lessons at a local stable, where she was treated like any other 8-year-old girl rather than a princess. Louis, still too young to fully understand the magnitude of their change, simply delighted in having his parents' full attention without the constant interruptions of royal duties. Their new routine was dramatically different from their previous life. Mornings began with family breakfast around a kitchen table instead of formal dining rooms. William would walk the children to the local village school, where they had enrolled under assumed names to protect their privacy. Catherine volunteered at the school library, reading stories to younger children who knew her simply as Mrs. Wales. But they hadn't abandoned their commitment to service entirely. Working with a small team of advisors, they began developing what they called Project Impact, a long-term initiative that would allow them to focus their charitable efforts on fewer causes, but with deeper, more sustained engagement. Instead of attending dozens of ceremonial events each month, they would spend months or even years working intensively on specific problems. Their first major project focused on youth mental health in rural communities, an issue that had been close to William's heart since his military service. Rather than simply visiting facilities and giving speeches, they embedded themselves in the work, spending weeks in small towns across Britain, living in local accommodations, and working directly with counselors, teachers, and young people who were struggling. The approach was unprecedented for former royals, and it generated its own kind of media attention. Tabloids struggled to categorize their new role. Were they still newsworthy? Should their activities be covered like celebrity philanthropy, or treated with the reverence reserved for royal duties? One evening, 6 months after their transition, William and Catherine sat in their garden as the sun set over the Cotswolds Hills. Their children's voices drifted from the house where they were playing video games, a normal childhood pleasure that had been carefully monitored during their royal years. "Do you miss it?" Catherine asked, her hand finding his as they watched the stars appear in a sky unmarked by the light pollution of London. William considered the question carefully. He missed the sense of clear purpose that royal duties had provided, the feeling that his presence at events genuinely mattered to the people attending them. He missed the pomp and ceremony that had connected him to centuries of British history. But he didn't miss the constant scrutiny, the impossible balance between public and private life, or the way every family moment had been potential fodder for tabloid speculation. "I miss serving," he said finally. "But I don't miss performing." The distinction had become crucial to their new understanding of their roles. In their previous life, so much of what they did was about being seen to care, being photographed supporting causes, making appearances that sent the right message about royal priorities. Now they were learning what it meant to care without cameras, to make a difference without recognition, to serve without spectacle. Their work in rural mental health was already showing results. They had helped establish 3 new counseling centers, developed a program that trained teachers to recognize signs of depression and anxiety in their students, and created a network of peer support groups for young people in isolated communities. None of it made headlines, but the impact was measurable and meaningful. The Queen visited them during their first autumn in the Cotswolds, arriving in a simple car with minimal security detail. She toured their modest home, played with her great-grandchildren, in the garden, and listened intently as William and Catherine described their new approach to public service. "You know," she said as they walked through the village together, drawing curious but respectful glances from locals, "I have spent my entire life being the Queen. I have never had the luxury of choosing how to serve. Perhaps you are showing us all what service could look like if it came from choice rather than obligation." Her words validated what they had been feeling, but hadn't quite been able to articulate. They weren't abandoning their duty to the British people. They were redefining what that duty could mean in the 21st century. As winter approached their new home, bringing with it a quietness that was impossible in royal residences, William and Catherine began to feel that they had made the right choice. Their children were thriving in their new environment. Their marriage was stronger than it had been in years, and they were finding ways to contribute to society that felt authentic and sustainable. The nation was watching their experiment, with a mixture of curiosity, admiration, and skepticism. Would this new model of royal service prove effective? Could they maintain their connection to the British people without the formal structures of monarchy? Only time would tell. But for the first time in years, William and Catherine felt they were living according to their own values, rather than simply fulfilling expectations inherited from previous generations. A year had passed since their dramatic transition from working royals to private citizens, and William and Catherine were beginning to see the fruits of their unconventional approach to public service. Their project impact had expanded beyond mental health to include environmental conservation and early childhood development, but it was their hands-on methodology that was gaining international attention. Unlike traditional royal patronages, where visits were carefully choreographed affairs lasting a few hours, William and Catherine would spend weeks or months embedded in communities, learning about problems from the ground up before developing solutions. Their second major initiative took them to the Scottish Highlands, where they spent 6 weeks living in a small cottage while working on rewilding projects that aimed to restore damaged ecosystems. Catherine found herself learning skills she never imagined needing as a future queen. She spent mornings helping to plant native trees, afternoons meeting with local farmers to understand their concerns about land use, and evenings reviewing scientific data about biodiversity loss. Her hands, once manicured for royal handshakes, became calloused from outdoor work. Her designer wardrobe gave way to practical hiking boots and weather-resistant clothing. "I feel more useful than I have in years," she confided to William one evening as they sat by a campfire after a day of tree planting. "When I attended those environmental galas in London, I always felt like I was playing dress-up. This feels real." William nodded, understanding completely. His own transformation had been equally dramatic. His military background had prepared him for physical challenges, but working directly with conservation scientists had taught him to see environmental issues with new complexity. He was learning to read soil samples, understand migration patterns, and grasp the intricate relationships between human activities and ecological health. Their children, now settled into their new school and community, would join them for weekends in Scotland. George, approaching his 11th birthday, had developed a serious interest in photography and was documenting their conservation work. His images captured not just the dramatic highland landscapes, but the small details of restoration, a seedling breaking through newly prepared soil, an elderly farmer's weathered hands planting native grasses, his parents working side by side with volunteers who treated them as equals rather than celebrities. Charlotte had found her own passion in the project, becoming fascinated by the birds that were beginning to return to restored habitats. She kept detailed journals of her observations, recording not just what species she saw but how they behaved, what they ate, and where they preferred to nest. Her enthusiasm infected the adult conservation team, who began looking forward to her weekend visits and her endless questions about avian behavior. Even 3-year-old Louis contributed in his own way, his wonder at seeing deer, eagles, and wildflowers creating moments of joy that reminded everyone why they were working to protect these spaces for future generations. The media coverage of their conservation work was different from anything they had experienced during their royal years. Environmental journalists who had dismissed royal patronages as superficial publicity stunts found themselves reporting on substantive scientific work. International conservation organizations began reaching out, not for ceremonial endorsements, but for genuine collaboration on research and restoration projects. Dr. Elena Rodriguez, a leading climate scientist from Oxford University, had initially been skeptical when approached about working with the former royals. "I expected the usual photo opportunity," she later admitted. "Instead, I found two people who were genuinely committed to learning and contributing." William asked more insightful questions about carbon sequestration than most graduate students, and Catherine's observations about community engagement helped us redesign our entire approach to working with local populations. Their third major project brought them even further from their comfort zone. Working with a coalition of charities focused on homelessness, they spent a month living in supported housing in Manchester, experiencing firsthand the challenges faced by people transitioning out of homelessness. They shared communal kitchens with former rough sleepers, attended job training sessions, and learned about the complex web of mental health issues, addiction, unemployment, and family breakdown that could lead to someone losing their home. The month in Manchester changed both of them profoundly. Catherine, who had grown up in comfortable middle-class circumstances and married into unimaginable wealth, found herself helping a teenage mother figure out how to budget for groceries while saving money for her own apartment. William, whose military service had exposed him to harsh conditions, but always with the knowledge that he would return to privilege, experienced the daily anxiety of people who had no safety net beyond the kindness of strangers and overstretched social services. "I thought I understood poverty from the statistics we reviewed during royal briefings," Catherine wrote in her private journal during their Manchester stay. "But statistics don't capture the exhaustion of never feeling safe, never knowing where you'll sleep next week, never having a private space to simply exist without judgment." Their work in Manchester led to their most innovative project yet, a comprehensive program that provided not just temporary housing, but wraparound services including mental health support, job training, financial literacy education, and ongoing mentorship. Rather than simply funding the program through their charitable foundation, they helped design and implement it, working directly with social workers, addiction counselors, and employment specialists. The program's success rate was remarkable. Within 6 months, over 80% of participants had moved into permanent housing, and more than half had found stable employment. The model began attracting attention from government officials, other charitable organizations, and academics, studying homelessness policy. But perhaps more importantly for William and Catherine, the work was providing them with the sense of purpose and impact that they had been seeking when they made their dramatic decision to step back from royal duties. They were no longer symbols of service. They were practitioners of it. The Queen, now approaching her 100th birthday, continued to follow their work with keen interest. During their regular private meetings, she would ask detailed questions about their projects, offering insights drawn from her own decades of public service. She had begun referring to their approach as the new model of monarchy, a system where royal service was based on expertise and impact, rather than tradition and ceremony. "You are showing the world that dedication to public service doesn't require a crown or a castle," she told them during one visit. "Perhaps this is how the monarchy survives in the modern world, not by preserving ancient rituals, but by finding new ways to serve the people we are meant to represent." As their second year of independence began, William and Catherine were fielding invitations from governments, international organizations, and universities around the world. Their combination of royal prestige and grassroots credibility was unique in the world of international development and social change, yet they remained focused on Britain, on the communities they were serving, and on proving that their unconventional choice had been the right one for their family and their country. The experiment was working, but they knew that its ultimate success would be measured not in media coverage or international recognition, but in the lives changed by their work and the example they were setting for their children about what it meant to serve others with purpose and authenticity. 3 years had passed since their farewell to royal duties, and the world had begun to take notice of what William and Catherine had accomplished in their new roles. Their unconventional approach to public service was being studied by philanthropists, governments, and royal families around the globe. But it was a crisis that would truly test their new model of service and demonstrate its power to the British people. The crisis began with floods that devastated communities across northern England in late autumn. Climate change had intensified the storms, and aging flood defenses failed catastrophically. Thousands of families were displaced, local businesses destroyed, and entire communities left wondering how they would rebuild their lives. Traditional royal protocol would have called for brief sympathy visits, perhaps a charitable donation from royal funds, and formal expressions of support. Instead, William and Catherine did something unprecedented. They packed up their entire family and moved to the flood zone for 3 months. They rented a caravan on the outskirts of Cumbria, enrolling their children in local schools and immersing themselves completely in the disaster response. William worked alongside emergency services, helping to coordinate rescue efforts and assist with evacuations. His military training proved invaluable, as he helped organize volunteer efforts and manage logistics for aid distribution. Catherine focused on the human side of the disaster, working with displaced families to help them navigate insurance claims, find temporary housing, and process the trauma of losing everything they owned. She spent long days in emergency shelters, helping elderly residents contact family members, organizing activities for traumatized children, and simply listening to people who needed to tell their stories to someone who cared. The children embraced their temporary new life with the adaptability that had served them well throughout their family's transition. George, now 13 and deeply interested in environmental science, began documenting the flood's impact on local ecosystems. His photographs and observations would later contribute to a comprehensive report on climate adaptation that influenced government policy. Charlotte, 11 and increasingly passionate about social justice, organized her new classmates to collect donations for flood victims. She spent her evenings writing letters to pen pals around the world, explaining what she was witnessing and asking for support for the relief efforts. Louis, now 6, brought joy to the emergency shelters with his natural ability to make people smile. His innocent questions about why people's houses were underwater led to conversations that helped adults process their own fears and losses. The media initially treated their presence in the flood zone with skepticism. Were they just seeking positive publicity? Was this an elaborate photo opportunity designed to rehabilitate their image after abandoning royal duties? But as days turned into weeks and weeks into months, it became clear that this was something entirely different. Television cameras captured William at 4 a.m, loading sandbags alongside local volunteers. They showed Catherine sleeping on a cot in an emergency shelter, having given up her private accommodation to house a family with young children. They documented their children attending local schools, playing with flood-affected classmates, and participating in community cleanup efforts without any royal fanfare or special treatment. Sarah Thompson, whose family farm had been completely destroyed by the floods, found herself working alongside Catherine to salvage what little could be saved from her home. "I expected her to show up, take some photos, and leave," Sarah later told reporters. Instead, she stayed. "She helped me sort through my grandmother's water-damaged photos one by one, trying to save what we could. She cried with me when we couldn't save my wedding album. That's not something you fake." The impact of their presence went far beyond individual interactions. William's background in emergency management and his connections to military and government officials helped streamline the disaster response in ways that saved lives and resources. Catherine's focus on long-term recovery needs identified gaps in government support that were quietly addressed before they became major problems. But perhaps most importantly, their presence sent a message to the rest of the country that these communities mattered. National attention remained focused on the flood recovery longer than it might have otherwise. Charitable donations poured in from around the world, Government officials made site visits they might not have otherwise prioritized. The Queen, despite her advanced age and increasingly frail health, made the journey to visit the flood zone in person. She arrived to find her grandson and his family deeply embedded in the community, their caravan barely distinguishable from those of the displaced families surrounding it. "This," she said quietly to William as they toured a damaged village together, "is what I always hoped royal service could become. Not standing above the people we serve, but standing with them." Her visit became her final major public appearance. The photographs of the elderly Queen, supported by her grandson as they walked through flood debris, became iconic images of a monarchy adapting to serve its people in their darkest hours. When the immediate crisis had passed and normal life began to resume in the affected areas, William and Catherine didn't simply pack up and leave. They established a permanent presence in the region, opening a field office for their charitable foundation and committing to monitor the long-term recovery process. Their flood response had demonstrated something unprecedented, that modern public service could be both deeply personal and systematically effective. They had shown that caring about people didn't have to be separate from understanding policy, that emotional support and practical assistance could work together, and that authentic service required genuine sacrifice and sustained commitment. The success of their flood response led to invitations from disaster-affected communities around the world. Governments began consulting them about crisis response strategies. International aid organizations sought their input on combining emotional support with practical assistance in disaster zones, but they remained committed to their adopted communities in northern England. The relationships they had built during those 3 months in the caravan became the foundation for ongoing work that would continue for years to come. They had learned that effective service meant staying engaged long after the cameras left, and the headlines moved on to other stories. As their 4th year of independence began, William and Catherine found themselves busier than they had ever been during their royal careers, but in ways that felt more meaningful and sustainable. They had proven to themselves, to the British people, and to the world that stepping away from traditional royal duties didn't mean abandoning service. It meant finding new ways to serve that were more effective, more authentic, and more aligned with their values as people and parents. The floods had been a tragedy, but their response had become a defining moment that demonstrated the power of their new approach to public service. They had shown that caring for people in crisis required more than sympathy and charity. It required showing up, staying engaged, and treating service as a partnership rather than a performance. 5 years had passed since William and Catherine made their unprecedented decision to step back from royal duties, and the world had fundamentally changed its understanding of what royal service could mean in the 21st century. Their final public appearance as senior working royals had been emotional, but it paled in comparison to the moment that would truly mark the end of their remarkable journey, a moment that would unite the nation in a way no one had anticipated. The announcement came on a crisp October morning, through the same simple channels they had used throughout their independent years. A brief statement on their personal social media accounts, free from the formal language of palace communications. After 5 years of pioneering a new model of service, they had decided to return to official royal duties, but with a completely transformed understanding of what those duties could accomplish. The decision had been brewing for months as they watched the monarchy evolve around them. King Charles, who had assumed the throne 2 years earlier following the Queen's peaceful passing at age 102, had been quietly implementing many of the innovations that William and Catherine had pioneered during their independent years. The royal family was smaller, more focused, and more directly engaged with the practical challenges facing British communities. Their children, now teenagers, had played a surprising role in the decision to return. George, at 16, had begun expressing genuine interest in his future role as king, but he wanted to approach it differently than previous generations. He had spent his formative years watching his parents serve without ceremony, work without recognition, and make real differences in people's lives through sustained commitment rather than symbolic gestures. "I want to be the kind of king you taught me to be," he had told his parents during a family meeting that would change the course of British royal history. "But I think I can do that better from inside the system than outside it, especially if We can bring everything we've learned back with us. Charlotte and Louis, now 15 and 12 respectively, had developed their own perspectives on service and responsibility. Charlotte had become passionate about environmental justice, having witnessed firsthand the impact of climate change on the communities they had served. Louis, despite his young age, had an intuitive understanding of how to connect with people that reminded many observers of his grandmother Diana's natural empathy. The public response to their decision to return was unlike anything the royal family had experienced in modern history. Rather than the polite approval that typically greeted royal announcements, there was genuine excitement and anticipation. People across Britain and the Commonwealth had watched their 5-year experiment with admiration and curiosity. Now they wanted to see what would happen when that experience was brought back into the formal structures of monarchy. Their return was not to be a simple resumption of previous roles. King Charles had worked with Parliament to create new positions within the royal hierarchy that would allow William and Catherine to continue their innovative approach while fulfilling constitutional requirements. They would become the first royal service ambassadors, with the freedom to spend extended periods embedded in communities while maintaining their ceremonial and constitutional duties. The ceremony marking their return was held not in Westminster, Abbey, or Buckingham Palace, but in the village hall of one of the flood-affected communities, where they had spent 3 months 5 years earlier. The location was deeply symbolic. This was where they had learned what authentic service meant, and this was where they wanted to demonstrate their commitment to bringing those lessons back to the monarchy. The hall was packed with people whose lives had been touched by their work over the past 5 years. Flood victims who had become friends, conservation volunteers who had worked alongside them in the Scottish Highlands, young people whose mental health had been supported by their programs, families who had been helped through homelessness and into stable housing. Sarah Thompson, the farmer whose family had lost everything in the floods, stood to speak on behalf of the community. Her voice was steady but emotional as she addressed the assembled crowd and the television cameras broadcasting the ceremony across the nation. 5 years ago, we thought we knew what royal service looked like, she said. We expected visits and sympathy and charitable donations. What we got instead was something none of us had imagined possible. We got neighbors. We got friends. We got people who stayed not just for the cameras, but for the long, hard work of rebuilding our lives and our community. She paused, looking directly at William and Catherine, who were seated in simple chairs rather than thrones, their children beside them in the same kind of folding seats occupied by everyone else in the hall. You didn't just serve us, she continued. You served with us. You showed us that caring about people isn't something you do from a distance, it's something you do up close with dirty hands and open hearts. And now you're going back to being official royals, but you're taking all of us with you. Every person you helped, every community you served, every life you changed. We're all part of the royal family now, because you made us part of your family when it mattered most. The ceremony included elements that would have been unthinkable in traditional royal events. Children from local schools performed songs they had written about environmental conservation. Former homeless individuals spoke about their journeys to stability. Conservation scientists presented research that had been conducted in collaboration with the royal family. When William finally stood to address the gathering, his words were simple but profound. 5 years ago, Catherine and I thought we were leaving royal service behind, he said. What we discovered instead was what royal service could become. We learned that the crown doesn't make you royal. Service does. Caring does. Showing up does. And we learned that the most important thing we could teach our children wasn't how to wear a title, but how to earn the trust of the people they serve. Catherine's remarks focused on the future. We're not returning to the monarchy that existed 5 years ago, she said. We're helping to create the monarchy that needs to exist for our children and grandchildren. A monarchy that serves by doing, not just by being. A monarchy that measures its success not in ceremonies attended or ribbons cut, but in lives improved and communities strengthened. The emotional climax of the ceremony came when the Queen's final letter was read aloud. She had written it shortly, before her death, to be opened only when William and Catherine returned to royal duties. In her familiar handwriting, She had expressed her pride in their courage to forge a new path and her confidence that they would bring transformative change to the institution she had served for over 70 years. "You have shown the world that tradition and innovation can work together," her letter concluded. "You have proven that serving the people doesn't require sacrificing your humanity. You have given the monarchy a future, and you have given your children an example of what it means to lead with love rather than duty alone." As the ceremony concluded and the crowd began to disperse, many observers noted that something fundamental had shifted in the relationship between the royal family and the British people. For the first time in generations, it felt like a true partnership rather than a hierarchical arrangement. The children who had grown up watching William and Catherine serve in their communities now had a different understanding of what it meant to be royal. The adults who had worked alongside them understood that service was something they could practice in their own lives, whether or not they wore crowns. That evening, as the family returned to their Cotswolds home for the last time before moving back to official royal residences, they reflected on the journey that had brought them to this moment. They had set out to protect their children's privacy and find more meaningful ways to serve. They had ended up transforming the monarchy and inspiring a new generation of British citizens to think differently about service, community, and what it meant to care for one another. The experiment was over, but its impact would continue for generations to come. William and Catherine's graceful farewell to traditional royal life had become the nation's most emotional moment, not because it was an ending, but because it was a beginning. The beginning of a new understanding of what it meant to serve, to lead, and to build a better future together.